Hello and welcome to Jim's Tabletop Wargaming. Today we're going to be painting a Blood Angels Terminator from the game Spacehawk. Specifically this one with the assault cannon here just on the front cover, following the painting instructions in this issue of White Dwarf. I'm going to break the video down into multiple parts. These are the paints used in part 1. I've decided to break the video down just to save this video being half an hour long. I've primed the model using black, drilled the barrels and removed any mould lines ahead of time. You can prime with Mephiston Red instead, I just had black to hand at the time. I'm going to paint this in sub-assemblies just to make it easier to reach every single detail. Now starting with Mephiston Red, we need to cover any areas we want to be red, such as the armour panels. Remember to thin your paint down slightly just to ensure a nice finish. As you can see, these are the areas here that I've picked out in red. Now the coat is slightly darker, that's because we need to apply a second coat just to get that finish right up to the bright red that we'd like. So here I'm applying the second coat. You can see already it is starting to look a little bit more vivid. And there we are. With the second coat applied, that red really does come through and looks a lot more bold than it did before. You can see here I've also done the head and the bust of the model. Next we're going to take an old brush and we're going to apply a little bit of blue tack to the end. This is so that we can attach the bust onto the end of the blue tack, and we'll be using this to keep our hands off of the model so we don't go over any areas we've painted already and move any paint around. This will just make it a lot easier to handle. Next I'm going to apply some Leadbelcher. And for this I'm using a detail brush. We're just going to pick out any areas that we want to be metallic. Primarily we're looking at places such as his ventilator or that front part of his mask and the optics just above his shoulder. Next we're going to use some masking tape here. I'm just going to run this across my palm just to get rid of some of the tackiness on there, as we don't want to damage any of the paint by ripping it off when we pull the masking tape off. And we're just going to take a small portion of that and apply it over one of these discs here about halfway down, just so that we can get a nice straight line as we put it along there. This is if you don't feel like using freehand technique. I'm using the sculpting tool here just to push that masking tape down so it's nice and firm against the surface. Now we're just going to apply the paint, being careful not to push the bristles underneath the masking tape. And there we are, we've got a nice straight line on there. And that's great if you don't want to do any freehand. Next we're going to apply Balthasar's gold. We're going to be applying this to the rims on those discs, onto the chains, skulls, and any bits on there that look like ornate detail. You just want to be very steady with this, just to make sure that you don't go over any areas you've already painted. And we're just lightly touching around the edges there. And with that done, we can move on to the next stage. So now we're going to be applying Rakarth flesh onto the purity seals, so just little strips of paper underneath them. Using a detail brush, just lightly pick out that detail, make sure to cover around the back as well. Now we're going to use Naggaroth Knight to pick out the wax of the purity seal. Again, just using a detail brush, just being very careful just to get around the back of the skull and make sure that we just pick out the detail of the purity seal. Next, we're going to apply some Warpstone glow into the smaller of the two targeting lenses there. Just want to be careful just to dip that directly in the middle. Gives us a nice green lens. Next we're going to be applying Evil Sunz Scarlet to the larger of the two targeting lenses, and we're also going to apply it onto the small lens that appears to be on his torso. I'm not sure if that is a lens, but I've decided to apply some red to it anyway. Again, just aiming for the dead center of it there. Next we're going to be applying some Abaddon black over the teardrop shapes. This is just to give it a good base coat for the next stages, in which we'd add some details onto those, which we'll come to towards the end. Next I'm going to apply some Ceramite white into the eyes. Again, just being very careful not to go over any of the red that we've done before. Just take your time and be slow with it. Remember, just carefully applying small brush movements to apply the white directly into the center of the eyes. And there we are. It's not looking too bad so far. Next we're going to apply some Agrax Earthshade, and in this case we're just aiming for the recesses, any panel lines where the red meets other areas of red, for instance any small recesses or curves, creases, anything like that, and especially any areas where the red meets other colours as well. We're not going to apply this completely all over it, as we do want quite a lot of that red showing through, so we're just going to pick out any of the recesses and just make those stand out a little bit more. You can apply it all over to the discs and also over the gold details. Also, you can apply this to the purity seals as well. Next we're going to take the Mephiston Red, and we're just going to go over any areas where we might have gone over slightly with the Agrax Earthshade and just make some of that red stand out again. So in this case we were going to avoid getting into any of the recesses with this, so we're just going to pick out the tops of the panels and any of the edges that are there, and we want to try and get the majority of the area looking red again. There we are. As you can see, there's a little bit more depth to the model now. Next we're going to take Evil Sunz Scarlet and just pick out the edges of the panels. So in this case this is a slightly thick layering on the edges, trying to let some of that Mephiston Red still show through, so we're just going to pick a little bit of the edgings out there, but we want to go a little bit thicker over, as we're going to be adding a further highlight next. There we are, there's a lot more personality to that model now. Now we're going to be using Fire Dragon Bright, and with this we're just going to use the Insane Detail brush and just pick out the edges. So we only want to apply a very small amount to the edges, and this is just on any of the panel lines, anywhere where you think light would be reflecting off, so normally towards the tops of each of the panels. And there we are, that's looking pretty good already, if I don't say so myself. Right, next I'm going to be applying Nuln oil to any of the silver areas. This is just to darken the colour and also add a little bit of shade into each of the edges, creases and anywhere else, just to break up some of those panel lines. We're also going to apply it to the lenses here as well, just around them, and also on the lenses themselves, just to give it a little bit more of a separation between each of the colours. Next we're going to be adding Gehenna's gold with the Insane Detail brush just over the tops of all of the gold details. So in this case we're almost doing it like a dry brush, you just want to go over the tops of each of the gold details, just picking out a lot of those details, leaving any areas where the Agrax Earthshade has gone into the recesses, we want to leave them completely alone. We want to just pick out the majority of the top detail. Next we're going to be using Auric Armour Gold just to pick out some of the higher points on the gold. So in this case we're looking for large flat areas. I'm going to be also doing it on the closest parts of the chain where it's more protruding out, just to really make it shine a little bit further. Next we're going to be adding Runefang steel to the metallic silver areas. So in this case we're just going around all of the edges and any of the top parts just to make them really stand out from each other. So we just want to get just the tops and just the edges of each of those silver details. We're also going to use Runefang steel just to go over some of the gold as well, just to make it look like some of the gold has been tarnished. And for this we just want to aim for the edges and anywhere where it might have rubbed off, for instance on the fronts of the skulls, right at the front where it might have rubbed against something else. Next we're going to be using Genestealer purple, and this is just to highlight the edges of the purity seal. We're also going to use Genestealer purple just to make a J shape on each of these teardrops, just to make them seem like gems. Next we're going to be adding some Emperor's Children just to the very top corner of the purity seal, just to give it an additional extra highlight. And then we're going to add it as well just onto the bottom of each one of those gems, just to make the very bottom of each of those a little bit more vibrant. Next I'm going to apply some Wild Rider Red just into the center of the lens there, so we're being very careful just to get the very middle of the lens. We'll do the same with the Moot Green just to make both of those stand out a little bit more. Next I'm going to use some Ceramite White just to touch up the eyes because they've been darkened slightly with the Agrax Earthshade. And then I'm going to apply a single dot to the top left corner of each of the gems just to make it look like light is reflecting off of them. Next I'm going to be applying Waywatcher green onto the eyes just to give them a slight green glow. I am aware as of editing that this has been discontinued by Games Workshop. I do apologise, I wasn't aware of that before I started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a follow-up video showing an alternative to using that. Next we're going to use Nuln oil just to darken around the lenses again, as some of the red did unfortunately go over onto those areas. I'm going to use Rakarth flesh here just to bring some of the colour back into the purity seal paper as well. Next we're going to use Pallid witch flesh just around the edges of the purity seal paper just to make that script look a little bit nicer, a little bit more highlighted. And we're going to use Abaddon black just to score a few lines across the surface very gently, and this is with quite a watery Abaddon black just to make it run a little bit thinner. And there we are, that's the bust of the model completed, and that's it for part 1. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.